Good afternoon, and welcome to Nature's Language, a symposium on Harriet Tubman. Thank you for joining us today at this Women's History program as we commemorate and celebrate the life of Harriet Tubman, one of the most iconic figures in American history. My name is Sherry Belfield, and I am a member of the Raptor Center's Board of Directors, and it is my pleasure to be your host for this program. 2022 is the bicentennial of Harriet Tubman's birth. This past Thursday, March the 10th, was Harriet Tubman Day. It has been a national holiday since 1990, when the 101st Congress passed a law that was then signed by President George H.W. Bush. Now, to paraphrase either Shaka Khan or Whitney Houston, depending on how old you are, she was every woman. Harriet Tubman was an enslaved woman who navigated her own escape from slavery to freedom and then returned numerous times to lead other enslaved people to land where they could be free. She was a woman who became one of the most famous and successful conductors on the Underground Railroad. Ms. Tubman was a noted abolitionist, political activist, suffragist, with speeches and activism being well known in the fight to abolish slavery and establish women's rights. But what most people don't know about this every woman is that she was a naturalist. It was her lifelong understanding of botany, wildlife, geography, and astronomy that made her a survivor and an extraordinary conductor on the Underground Railroad. Today, the Raptor Center, artist Cami Shalom, and our friends from other environmental organizations have come together for this Women's History program to give insight on Ms. Tubman, the unsung naturalist, and how she used nature's language to lead people to freedom. Before I introduce Cami, I want to take a moment to set the stage and help us remember why Ms. Tubman is revered for her courage, fortitude, and bravery as a standard bearer for freedom. Much has changed in America in the 200 years since Harriet Tubman's birth. Slavery in the United States was practiced in both northern and southern states during the early days. However, the South's economic dependence on cotton and other crops made slavery a financial necessity to keep plantations running. Slavery became less important to the economy in the North, and it eventually became known as the South's peculiar institution. Meanwhile, the abolitionist movement took hold in areas of the North. And even though we now refer to them as enslaved people and enslavers, particularly to humanize those who were enslaved, we should be under no illusions that slavery, as it was practiced in America, treated the enslaved humanely or even recognized them as human. The form of slavery practiced in the United States is referred to as chattel slavery, which means the enslaved people were property of their owners from birth to death. They were exploited as free labor and legally dehumanized as chattel, just like cattle or any other livestock, to be wheeled, traded, or sold as their owners saw fit. Nothing about the institution of chattel slavery was humane. Yet from the onset of slavery on these shores in the 17th century, there was always the quest for freedom. Many enslaved people were able to buy their freedom if they were fortunate enough to work in trades or escape freedom, which was a daunting and dangerous undertaking. These freedom seekers, as they were called, were often aided in their quest by abolitionists and people of all races and all classes. This infrastructure of people and places came to be known as the Underground Railroad. They facilitated movement by land and by water to freedom in the northern United States and into Canada. But what a lot of people don't know is that the Underground Railroad had some routes that also went south to Mexico, where slavery had been abolished. From the establishment of the Underground Railroad to the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, to the eventual ratification of the 13th Amendment in 1865, It has always been about the fundamental belief in and desire for freedom. So with that history in mind, we have an award-winning artist who will bring Harriet Tubman to life for us. Cammie Davis Shalom is an accomplished actor, teaching artist, storyteller, and playwright. A native of Charlotte, Cammie is a proud graduate of West Charlotte High School and North Carolina Central University, where she earned degrees in English literature and theater arts. She has performed in major productions across the country and partnered with esteemed organizations such as the Kennedy Center and the Harvey B. Gantt Center for African American Art and Culture, which is right here in Charlotte. Cammie is the author of and actor in a one-woman show named Call Me Madam, The Making of a Millionaire, which tells the life of Madam C.J. Walker, a Black woman who became the first American woman to be a self-made millionaire. That show was a national success, and it earned her a Best Performance in a Leading Role award at the Atlanta Black Arts Festival. She has also been named Best Local Playwright by Charlotte Magazine. Cammie is a wife and a proud mother of 2 sons, and it is my pleasure to present this amazing writer, artist, and performer, Ms. Cammie Davis Shalom.
And cast a watchful eye on Canaan's happy, joyful land, where my possessions lie. I'm bound for the promised land. I'm bound for the promised land. Oh, who will come and go with me? I'm bound for the promised land. Oh, who will go? Who'll go with me? You go? Will you go? Will you go? I'm bound for the promised land. How y'all doing? My name is Harriet Tubman, and some of y'all may know a few things about me, but today I hope that I'm going to tell you a few things that maybe you did not know. Now, first of all, I want to start by saying I'm so happy to be here as y'all celebrate my 200th birthday. Oh, I'm still looking good for 200. Now, you see this scar here on my head? I'm going to tell you how I got that scar in just a little while. But sometimes this scar causes me to have what they call fainting spells. And so I need your help If I happen to have a faint spell here today, I need y'all to wake me up because I gotta make sure y'all hear my story. And this is what I want y'all to say. I want y'all to say, rise up, Harriet, rise up. Rise up, Harriet, rise up. Can y'all say it? Rise up, rise up. Y'all sound good. Rise up, Harriet, rise up. I want y'all to say, if I happen to have a faint spell while we're talking. Now, I have so many things that happened to me in my life. I don't really rightly know where to begin. Like my daddy always said, I guess the best place to begin is at the beginning. So I was born in Dorchester County, Maryland. My mama's name was Harriet. My daddy's name was Ben. And when I was born, they named me Araminta. And they called me Minty for short. And now, my mama, my daddy, my brothers and sisters, I have 11 brothers and sisters, y'all. They were all slaves on the broadest plantation, even me. And I went to work when I was 6 years old. Anybody in here 6 years old? I was 6 years old when they took me to work. They didn't know where to treat a little girl. My first job was rocking the baby to sleep for the lady of the house. And if that baby woke up, it was trouble for me. I wasn't too good at keeping that baby asleep because I was just a baby myself. So they sent me to another plantation to keep on working. But my mama, before I left, she taught me a few things about the Bible. She had this story she used to tell me about Moses in the Bible. Now, none of us could read or write, but she heard this story about this man named Moses, who was also a slave, and so were his people. And he walked right up to that slave owner. They called him a Pharaoh. Walked right up to him and said, "Let my people go." He had to say it a few more times, but eventually that Pharaoh let those people go. And that sounded real good to me, because being a slave was not an easy job. Out there working in the heat of the day with the men picking cotton or tobacco, from the time the sun came up until that sun went down again. Now, my daddy, he taught me a whole lot about living on the land. He taught me how to find wild strawberries and wild blackberries and which plants I could eat and which plants I couldn't eat. He told me that sassafras was good for healing all kinds of ailments. He told me how to pick acorns and take the shells off of them, soak them in water, and then, snap. Daddy taught me a lot of good things that would come in handy when I got older. Now, I kept working on the plantation. One day I fell in love and I got married to a man. His name was John Tubman. Now, John, he was a free man. And I loved him. Me and John didn't always see eye to eye. Because when I told John that I was ready for my freedom, he didn't want to hear nothing about it. I think he was just downright scared for me. But I told him, one of these days, I'm going to be gone. I cannot be a slave forever. There's a Moses down on the inside of me, and I got to get out of here. So I told my brothers, see, maybe they would be on my side. They didn't want to get none of it either. So one night, my husband went to sleep, packed myself a little bag, left, headed on my way to Philadelphia. I knew it was going to take me a while, but I'd heard about this thing called the Underground Railroad. Anybody know what the Underground Railroad is? Now, it's not a real train. It's a system that helps people to escape from slavery into freedom. Now, once in a while, I did ride on a train. And most of the time, I was walking through swamps, forests, and woods, and crossing over swamps and lakes and rivers. While I was running, the slave catcher was after me. There was a $100 reward if anybody could return me back to the plantation. I refused to look back. Traveled through all those swamps, ate on those wild strawberries that my daddy told me about. I felt like I was getting sick. I grabbed me some sassafras to soothe my stomach. In about 2 or 3 weeks, I arrived in Philadelphia, and I had to look at my hands. My hands looked new. I felt new on the inside. I didn't feel complete without the ones that I loved that were back there on the plantation, still working from sun up to sundown. So I made some trips back, down to the South, about 17 trips in total. And I helped almost 100 people gain their freedom. Thank you. Sometimes when I had those fainting spells, God will give me a vision. He'll tell me which way to go. Tell me how to get out of trouble. Thank y'all for helping me to rise up. I went back down south, helped about 70 people to gain their freedom. That made me feel like the Moses, my people, helping them to get out of bondage into a life where they could be the master of their own lives, start their own businesses, and travel where and when they wanted to. That's the way to live. Now, they used to sing this song for me called Go Down Moses. I'm gonna sing it, but I wonder if y'all will help me sing it too. I'm gonna start it, and maybe you'll join me. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell Pharaoh to let my people go. Sing it with me. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell Pharaoh to let my people go. Just one more time. Say, go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell Pharaoh to let my people go. You know, there are a lot of things that I used to help me get to freedom over and over and over again. All of those rivers I crossed and all those woods I traveled through by night. My daddy taught me that moss grows on the north side of the tree. That way I knew I was headed in the right direction. He also taught me how to read the stars and look for the brightest north star in the sky to make sure I was headed in the right direction. He also told me to make sure I traveled at night as much as possible because it would be harder to find me, but from time to time, I did have to travel in the day, but I had some tricks for that too. Sometimes I would dress myself up like a man, put my brim down real low, and just walk straight forward and hopefully nobody would stop me. One day I was traveling in the daytime, and I found this chicken and I put him under my arms. because I had a little trick I was gonna play in case somebody saw it. So I was walking along this path in broad daylight. All of a sudden, I saw two slave catchers riding up on their horse, and they looked me right in my eye. Well, I let that chicken go, and I began to flap my arms and say, "Oh no, don't leave, chicken! Mr. Wilson gonna be mad. Come on here, chicken! Come on here, chicken! Come on back here!" And they were so dumbstruck by my shenanigans. They didn't even pay me being out here by myself no mind. They laughed at me until their sides hurt. And when they left, I grabbed that chicken and went right on about my business. Headed right back to Philadelphia. Now I'll tell you what, the greatest thing about freedom is being the master of your own life. Deciding who and what and where you want to be. But I wouldn't have made it if I didn't have all those lessons from my mama and my daddy bringing me up. When they tried to send me away from that plantation, oh, I cried and I cried and I cried. Nobody cared. They sent me off anyway. There wasn't no way to treat a little girl. I kept that in the back of my mind. Every time I went back down south, I thought about how my people were being treated day in and day out with no end in sight. And I would tell them, "Why don't you come with me if you're planning on turning back? Don't you come with me if you're planning on turning back? Because there's no going back from here. Either you want to be free or you don't. If you come with me, we're going all the way." So at the end, over 70 people gained their freedom. I'm so grateful for all the lessons I learned along the way. The greatest lesson of all is being the master of your own life. Thank y'all for coming here today. And I hope that I maybe told you something about my life that you didn't know before. Nature was very important to me and to my family. And I hope that you keep that in mind when you think about Harriet Tubman, the naturalist. Thank you.
Wow, that was great. Tammy, thank you for that amazing performance. And this is not the last that you'll see of her. She will perform again at the end of the program. You know, nature has a language. It's a language we can learn if we pay attention and use all of our senses. It's the sound of running water, bird calls, howling wolves, croaking frogs, whistling wind, crashing waves, the roll of thunder, chirping crickets, the twinkling of fireflies, and yes, even the pattern of the stars. Nature speaks to nature, and nature speaks to us. Now, representatives from the Raptor Center, the Shield Museum of Natural History, Catawba Riverkeeper Foundation, and Anne Springs Close Greenway will teach us nature's language and how this iconic American shero used that language as a fighter for and defender of freedom. Our first presenter is the Raptor Center's own Mckenna Schaefer. Mckenna will tell us about the barred owl, which is a raptor, also known as a bird of prey, and how Harriet Tubman used the call of that particular owl as one of her navigation tools along the Underground Railroad. Mckenna is a graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, where she majored in wildlife ecology with a focus on interpretation and education. Nature and animals have always been an important part of her life, she said, even before she could walk. Mckenna has been the wildlife educator at Raptor Center for over 3 years, and when she isn't working with her avian co-workers, she can be found, of course, outdoors, competing in Ultimate Frisbee, or at a friend's house in Dungeons and Dragons, a D&D girl. So Mckenna, the floor is yours.
Thank you guys so much for coming out today. Thank you, Sherry, for being a wonderful host. We're really excited to be able to share this side of barred owls with all of you. So what we're really excited about is showing off one of my personal favorite birds. That's me. On the right side. So I'm the wildlife educator, and my main job is to inspire visitors. It's to inspire the public. And one of my favorite birds in order to do that is actually the barred owl. The reason I love barred owls so much is because they tend to really speak to people in different ways. If you ever look at a barred owl, they just gaze into your soul. These have these beautiful, dark and deep eyes. And whenever I bring birds to a program or whenever people come to our center, the barred owls really do tend to be their favorite. And as you can see, these guys are definitely my favorite as well. I scoured my phone trying to find a good picture of me with a barred owl. And getting a barred owl to look at the camera is actually a lot harder than you would think it is. And so I just had to post all of the ones of them actually not looking at me. So when I was asked to do this presentation, this really gave me a whole new and unique sort of look on barred owls. Normally what I talk about is the natural history and how cool these guys are and their important role in the environment. So digging deep into how important these guys were to history and how important these were to Harriet Tubman just gave me a whole new outlook, and I'm very excited to share what I learned with you guys. So what we're gonna do is we are going to start with a video real quick, and this is just to give us an idea of what barred owls actually sound like in the forest. Whoa.
I get a lot of phone calls and emails and letters from people who woke up in the middle of the night thinking something terrible was in the campground when they suddenly were hearing barred owls. They're often doing that because they're hearing another peer into a barred owl and establish territory. And that's when fear starts really revving up and making us territorial. One night, I was being totally quiet, just walking along this road. And through two barred owls, there was a full moon behind them, and you could actually see their eyes as they were talking.
How many of you guys knew that they made monkey noises? I'm sure this doesn't. Perfect. make sure I get it on the right slide. Which button do I press to make it bigger? Current slide. Let's see. We can just start it from here. Okay. Back one. So those barred owl calls, like when I first listened to that, I was actually in the office sitting by myself, and it gave me chills. Like the echoing that these guys can create to make a really loud noise is absolutely crazy. And then I really got to thinking about having to listen to those calls like your life truly depended on it, like your freedom depended on it. And it's actually really neat because Harriet Tubman was able to utilize those calls in order to communicate with people who were looking for freedom. She was able to mimic those calls in order to communicate whether or not it was free to come out of your hiding spot, if you were okay to leave, or if it was not okay, it wasn't safe to leave your hiding spot. So listening to those barred owl calls are actually super important when it came to being on the Underground Railroad. You really needed to listen and try to figure out when it was safe, and those barred owls, those calls, let them do that, which I think is really, really neat. Now, this is one of my favorite pictures of barred owls. It actually really shows those beautiful dark eyes that I talked about that really stare into your soul. Now, those eyes actually tell us a lot about an owl. Those eyes, since they're super dark, they're super black, that tells us that they hunt in the middle of the night when it's super quiet, when it's almost completely dark out. So when the sun starts to set, these guys start hooting. They start making those calls, and they let all the other owls in that area know, hey, this is my territory. This is where I'm getting dinner. Stay away. And then when it gets completely dark out, then that's when they really start hooting, and they start going back and forth, fighting over that best mouse, that best hunting spot. And then again, as the sun starts to rise, they start hooting back and forth again, like, hey, you stay in that tree, I stay in this tree, we're good to go. These guys hoot basically all night long. And that does come in handy, again, on the Underground Railroad, when you don't know when the best time to move is. You're gonna start moving as soon as you can. And if barred owls are calling in like dusk, dawn, in the middle of the night, if they're hooting at that time, it's not suspicious if Harriet Tubman starts hooting at that time as well, right? That's a normal time for owls to call. So it was really easy to mask her calls with other owls because it's not out of the blue. It's not out of the ordinary. It's not suspicious. So being able to look at the natural history of these owls and figuring out why Harriet Tubman chose barred owls, I was able to put together a lot that I thought was really, really neat and really fascinating. So this is their most well-known call. It sounds like, who cooks for you? Who cooks for you? Might do it again. Do you guys kind of hear that? Yeah, so that's what they're most known for. And it's actually pretty easy to mimic if you've got a lot of practice. That was my executive director. He currently holds the title of Best Barred Owl Call. So yes, the reigning champ for sure. So it is easy to mimic that, and you are able to get a pretty good projection. And so you can communicate from quite a distance to talk about when it's safe to move and when it's not. Now these guys have excellent camouflage, so they also are able to live in so many different types of environments. They're called barred owls because of those stripes or their bars on their stomach and on their chest. And that allows them to blend in with almost any type of tree. Now, the Underground Railroad was a huge expanse, right? You had to cross all sorts of different types of habitat. So again, if these guys can blend in anywhere and they can live anywhere, they make the perfect owl to help utilize and help those calls because again, it's not going to be suspicious if you hear that specific owl call in almost every habitat. So they were able to really use this bird in order to move safely, which I think is really, really neat. So here are some additional resources that I really enjoyed reading. One was put on by Audubon magazine. You can find that on their website. And they wrote something really, really good about Harriet Tubman and barred owls. And that's where I got a lot of my information from. And one poem on the bottom there that actually spoke to me really strongly. And so I recommend reading that by Robert Hayden. He referenced barred owls in that poem. It's all about Harriet Tubman. It's all about the Underground Railroad. And it's a longer poem, but it was really, really well written and it was absolutely beautiful. So barred owls, really awesome birds, not only because they look cool, but they do have a deeper meaning than even I realized. I've been working with barred owls for so long. So next time you guys go outside in your backyards to a park, when you guys are hiking, just sit and listen to their birds because their calls can mean a lot more than you originally thought. Thank you.
So thank you, Mckenna, for that informative presentation. I was really excited and stunned when I read about how Ms. Tubman used barred owls, and it was that particular article in Audubon magazine that led to this program. Yeah, we saw that last year. So we've been talking about this at Raptor Center for about a year. So that was really amazing. And thank goodness she knew nature's language. The sound of wildlife isn't the only language that nature speaks. The atmosphere speaks clearly too, but it requires us to be observant. In addition to the sense of sound, we must use our sense of sight and the feel of the sunlight, the wind, and precipitation on our skin. This presentation from the Shield Museum of Natural History will show us how nature's language is interpreted through the stars and weather. Our presenter is Candace Jordan. Candace graduated from UNC Asheville with a degree in atmospheric sciences. She worked as a broadcast meteorologist at various stations in North Carolina before she realized that science communication is her passion. She is now planetarium administrator and meteorologist for the Shield Museum, which is in Gastonia. When she's not looking at the clouds or the stars, Candace can be found with her husband, enjoying life or doing a jigsaw puzzle. So Candace, you can take it away.
Hey, how's everybody doing? Good, all right, so raise your hand if you've ever seen a cloud before. Cool, awesome. Raise your hand if you've ever seen a star before. Awesome, great. Yeah, so one of the roles that I play at the Shield Museum is I love to help people understand when they're looking up what's going on. So I like to say that my job at the museum, being a meteorologist and in the planetarium, is that I like to look up. It just depends on how far I'm looking as to what I'm talking about. So we are going to start, I'm going to start with the astronomy side of things. So how many of you have ever heard of this thing called the Big Dipper before? Yeah, anybody know what it looks like? Have you ever found it outside? It's really cool, really easy to find. And it's one of what we call our circumpolar asterisms. I know, big word. It just means you can see it year round. So it doesn't matter what time of year, you can find the Big Dipper. Now, I always love when I'm doing star shows, make this joke of oh man, if there's ever a zombie apocalypse and GPS is down, you can able to navigate yourself. But think about it, it's not a zombie apocalypse. These people were, using the stars for their freedom. So let's talk about how you can use them in the night sky. So here I've got the Big Dipper. It's 7 stars, very bright stars. It's very easy to find. And you're gonna find 4 that make a box and then 3 that make the handle. Everybody see either one of these things here? You got the box and the handle. Still refer to these as the bowl and the handle. So they think it's like a little dipper and a Big Dipper. Now you can use the 2 end stars of the bowl. So the ones pointing away from the handle on the opposite side. And those can actually guide you into finding other things. So what's really cool is we can use these two, Merak and Dubby, to help you find this star called Polaris. Anybody ever heard of Polaris before? Yeah, Polaris has this really, really, really common name. Anybody know what it is? The North Star. Yeah, you're exactly right. Now, it's in kind of one of those misconceptions that it's the brightest star in the sky. It's actually the 48th brightest star in the sky, but it's always there. And the cool thing is you can find the North Star at any point in the year because it is always going to stay in that spot year round, no matter the time of day, no matter the time of year. You're going to be able to find it. So the picture you see on the upper left, you see all these like circular things, the time lapse of the stars going through the night. And right there in the middle is Polaris. So really important star because it didn't matter what time Harriet was going through. You know, if 2 a.m. was the safe time, great, you can still find the North Star. Now, let's pretend we find the North Star, right? So we are pointing north, right? So we're looking at the North Star. So what direction is going to be over here? Anybody know? So we have north, east, so that means west is over here, and then south would be behind you. So look at that, you got your compass directions. Now, what if it's not exactly nighttime yet? How do we know our compass directions? Can we look at the North Star? No, our biggest star gets in the way, the sun, right? So we'll talk about how we can find some of those directions here in just a second. So another really, really cool thing about the North Star is that if you traveled to the North Pole and stood on the North Pole, the North Star would be exactly overhead. So our Earth tilted a little bit, all right? And we tilt and we rotate. Oh, it's fun, right? Try that at home. When you do that, the top of your head is pointed at the North Star. So that means in our sky, the North Star is not straight up and down. It's actually kind of at an angle because the Earth is tilted. Now, I bring this up because whenever you look at the North Star, you can approximate the latitude that you're at in the Northern Hemisphere. So around this area, we're at about 35 degrees latitude, give or take a little bit. Go, put your hand straight out and go up 35 degrees in the sky, you're going to find the North Star. So if you want to go north, say to Philadelphia, you're going to need to get higher in latitude. So guess what? The North Star is going to need to get higher. So that's another way you can kind of tell where you are. Now you're like, great, that's wonderful. 35 degrees. How do I know what that is? Right? 90 straight up. But can everybody do give me a fist? Put a fist on top. Great, that's 20 degrees. So your fist is roughly 20 degrees. So if you want to go out and try to find it tonight, 1, 2, 3, and a half. And you'll be able to find the North Star tonight. So using the Big Dipper, using simple hands, you have your arm outstretched, you can find different degrees. So the North Star, the Big Dipper, super incredibly important. Now, not only can the Big Dipper point you to Polaris and then get us our latitude, we can also tell time by the Big Dipper. So if you'll look on this lower one, the lower right picture here, you'll see the Big Dipper has kind of a different look during different times of year, right? So we're actually right now, spring is one of the best times to find the Big Dipper because it's highest in the sky. So if you live in the area with trees, buildings anywhere near you, spring is the best time because you can look up and find it high in the sky. Fall is when it's lowest in the sky. So we can tell the season by looking at the Big Dipper. But this is also important because not only does it change in the evening by season, but as we move through the night, the Big Dipper is going to move in this progression. So in the spring, we know the Big Dipper is high overhead. That means in the morning time, the Big Dipper is low. So that's another way you could tell time in the overnight hours, looking and seeing how those constellations, how the Big Dipper moves around. If you know the season, then you know by the time it's getting really low, it's getting close to morning, we probably need to find shelter. So that's another way, is using time. Another way we can do that is the sun. So remember how I told you see if it's daytime. How do we figure out our compass directions? Yeah. So can anybody tell me which way the sun rises? Anybody know from this vantage point which way the sun is rising? From the east, yeah. And then it sets in the west. So if you know that when you walk outside, put your arms out like this, get one side on east, one side on west, and guess what? Now you have your compass directions. It's not going to be super incredibly exact because it's a little bit like southwest sometimes that it says, but it'll get you in a general direction. So that's another way you can use the sun. Also, sunflowers have the word sun in it. They actually track the sun. So if you watch the sunflowers during the day, they will open up at sunrise, they'll move through the day, and at sunset, they're on the other side. So really, really cool, yeah. Now, not only can we use astronomy, but weather can also help you navigate. Now, it's not going to be as concrete as astronomy, all right? The stars are pretty fixed. Have you ever seen a cloud just sit on top of you for years on end? Don't count the winter of 2019 when it rained for 80 years. Don't count that one. All right, well, we have these things called prevailing winds. So it just means the winds that are typical around this area. So when we think about our weather here in North Carolina, generally our weather comes from the west, moves through to the east. We do have exceptions, but that's our prevailing wind. And so sometimes you can look at trees, and if they're tilted a certain way, they're used to having that prevailing wind. This is why it's an issue when we have hurricanes come through and our weather comes from the opposite side. That's how we get trees to come down a lot, because it's coming from that opposite side. It's not, that tree is not ready. If I'm braced this way, and all of a sudden the wind comes this way, I'm like, whoa. So prevailing winds is a way to kind of see your direction. So if you know here on the East Coast, generally you're going to have a west to east progression. You can watch the trees and wind. Our upper level winds are really, really important. So this here is not so much for navigation, but just for comfort, because these people are going through the Underground Railroad, all right? They're outdoors a lot of the time. You're going to want to keep an eye on the weather, because it's going to be a whole lot different to go in the middle of the night with clear skies versus going through the middle of the night in a thunderstorm, right? Yeah. So upper level winds, they're ones that are very, very high overhead. Have you ever heard of the jet stream before? Yeah. So the jet stream is going to help carry those winds. So it's going to be a precursor to what's coming. So have you ever heard the myth in the wintertime? If there's a halo around the moon, or around the moon, snow is in 3 days. Anybody ever heard that? You may or may not. There's some variations on that, but there is some truth in that. If you start seeing halos around the sun or around the moon, it means we've got cirrus clouds, very high overhead clouds coming in. Those are typical ahead of a front a couple of days out. So if you start seeing cirrus clouds come in, that means we're going to see a front come through soon. That's going to give you the active weather like rain, snow, and stuff like that. So really important to find those upper level winds just so you can kind of plan out your route coming up. Next thing, how many of you have ever seen those cumulus clouds, those fair weather cotton balls in the summertime? Yeah. I encourage you this summer, track them for a week with your watch. You'll notice right around 2 o'clock, bam, 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 bam. They come up in the sky. That's another good way in the daytime to track the time. You can know it's kind of in the afternoon. Now, how many of you have ever seen a thunderstorm before? Yeah, these things grow incredibly tall, very vertical clouds. And using those upper level winds, you can see the top of a thunderstorm. If it starts moving that way, you know which way your winds are moving, so you can kind of get that general west to east progression. And also, if you start seeing those cumulus clouds, those fair weather cumulus clouds, they're fair weather when they're light. If they start turning gray, that's how you know rain is about to happen. So with that, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. That is a little bit of how we have the astronomy and the meteorology side of things, helping us navigate and also helping us just with our comfortability with moving around in nature. I'm from the Show Museum. We're down in Gastonia. We do this stuff all the time. If you haven't visited us, please do. And I want to give everyone here a big thank you for having us here. Do we have time for questions or time to move on? All right, sounds good. Thank you, guys.
Well, thank you, Candace. You really schooled us with your expert knowledge of meteorology and astronomy. Tells me I definitely could not have majored in that in college, but you have made me want to visit Shields Planetarium to learn more, and then to visit a dark sky park so that I can experience the stars and nature for myself. Since the dawn of humans, we have been fascinated by weather and the heavens. Cultures around the world have created mythologies about the celestial bodies in the sky. If they could find the Big Dipper, which they also called the drinking gourd, then they could find the star that lit the way to true north, the places where they could be free. We've learned about how Miss Tubman used wildlife, astronomy, and weather. Now we'll learn how she used geography, particularly the waterways, as a major route along the Underground Railroad. Geography has a language. It's the shape of the mountains, the location of natural landmarks, the direction of a river's flow, and the timing of the tides. Water covers more than 70% of the Earth's surface and is essential to sustain life. It was also a familiar feature in Miss Tubman's life, as she told us. She was born and lived on Maryland's eastern shore and was often sent to labor in the waterways, laying muskrat traps or working on the docks. So she knew the language of water. Our next presenter from Catawba Riverkeeper Foundation will give us the details of how she used the language of water on the Underground Railroad. Becca Tate graduated from Rhodes College in Memphis and then matriculated in medical school at the University of Tennessee Health Sciences Center. She is now a semi-retired pediatrician and has found a passion as an environmental educator. She works with North Carolina Wildlife Federation as a staff environmental educator during summer program and with Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools as a reading fluency tutor. As part of her nature gig, she loves spending time as a volunteer with the Raptor Center and the Catawba Riverkeeper Foundation, or as she says, grab a kayak and go watch the birds. So Becca, float on, the mic is yours.
All right, y'all sing with me. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Who's that young girl dressed in red? God's gonna trouble the water. Must be the children that Moses led. Wade. All right, that's good right there. All right, so thank you all very much for joining with me. I've never been a singer, but I love this song. And as you can see in the song and many other spirituals, water is a common theme within them. And this song in particular, one of the lines in it must be the children that Moses led. And as we've heard, Moses was one of the nicknames for Harriet Tubman. So this song could be used in a lot of different ways. It's a beautiful spiritual that has its own meaning, but also there's hidden meanings within, so that some people might understand the hidden meanings, other people might not. And so it could be used for that. So as we've heard, Harriet Tubman was born and raised on the eastern seaboard of Maryland. So it's right here along the Chesapeake Bay, very water-rich country. The bay on one side, many small waterways in between, all the way up until you get to Freedom, which would be Philadelphia and the Pennsylvania line. This is the western coast of Africa. And one thing I've learned as I've been reading about this, and unfortunately had never been taught in the history that was taught to me, was how water influenced West Africa is. So as you can see, you see the same thing. Bays, many rivers. There was a very strong water culture in the ancestral home where these people who had been captured and brought here, that culture came with them. And so there was still a water culture that came with them. This is one example. This is the country of Sierra Leone. And all the blue area and the greenish area is water or waterscapes like that. I had never pictured that. Unfortunately, the history we've been taught a lot when we think of Africa is a Saharan field, right? Dry, a lot of water. We're not, a lot of dryness, excuse me. We're not taught about the water culture, but that's very, very important for what was brought here. Additionally, how gorgeous it was and how wet it was. This is Sierra Leone, a waterscape of it. Notice this particular waterscape, low rivers, water and land intermingling. This is the Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge, as it's called right now. That's the ancestral area where Harriet Tubman was. This is Dorchester County. Look and see, I'm gonna go back. Look how similar they are. So there was a culture of waterscapes that came with them, but you can see again, it's not all just one big river. It's not our Catawba River, one big river. And it's, of course, the Catawba River didn't look like what it looks like now. You have to think more about what it looks like in South Carolina, undammed. But this is what she would have been looking at, trying to think about how to navigate through what's dry land and then swampy land and then maybe some flowing water and then back, trying to do all those different things. One of the books that was very helpful for me, and I recommend, is this book called Undercurrents. It's by Kevin Dawson, and he writes about aquatic culture in the African diaspora. And I just want to read one of his quotes, that water was a defining feature for African descended peoples living among the seas, rivers, lakes, and estuaries, as immersionary traditions enabled many to merge water and land into unified culturescapes. Accounts indicate that many were adept swimmers, underwater divers, and canoers. Let me go back. All right, so we're just going to leave it on that one. So how and why was water used? Again, this was somebody who, as we've already heard, understood water, knew about water. So the first part of how they used it was to avoid tracking. The slave catchers used a lot of dogs that were trained to go after humans and try to find humans. They weren't just for hunting wildlife. And they were trained to try to find people that were out in woodways and things like that. And so we know that dogs cannot track as well in water. It's a myth that they can't track at all in water. They still can, but they can't track as well. So there was some safety within the water itself. They also could hide. Think about if you were out somewhere like this and you were here in an open field, and especially some of the areas there didn't have a lot of underbrush. And so if you're in an open field, you're going to have sight visuality. But if you go into that water and you sink down, you just keep your breathing and your eyes above, you're much, much harder to see. So there's that visual. So we're trying to not be seen. We're trying to not be smelled to get in. Additionally, to not be heard. When you're in the water, there's other things around. And so you can just, if you're just calm in the water, you're not being heard. Whereas if you're on the land, you might step on something wrong. You might have something come up to you. So things like that. So avoiding tracking was one reason. Another reason was for navigational purposes. Think about every river that you know in our area. What direction does it flow? They go from north to the south. There may be some twists and turns along the way. The majority of rivers in our area, with a few exceptions, go from the north to the south. So you know, if you want to go to the north, you go upstream. So that's a way to go. And even if you add a twist or a turn, you know that you may go a little bit east or a little bit west, but you're eventually going to go back north again. So it was a navigational way for that. The other parts of it were navigation as it was actually used. As we heard, she worked on docks. And there were some people along the Underground Railroad, both free Black people and white people who owned some of the boats. They would put little special cargo areas that were unseen within a boat. So if they needed to go across a short stream, there just may be a small cargo hold and they could get into that. If it was a bigger way to go along one of the waterways, there may even be a bigger section for them. So that was another way. One of the stations on the Underground Railroad might have been a boat instead of a house, for something like that. And so there were all kinds of different reasons. Again, a cultural understanding of water that could have been shared among some people to avoid tracking, to avoid being seen. So I want to leave you with this story that just, to me, has me gripping. And I'm at the age that I need my reading. So this is from a great biography of Harriet Tubman. Please, this book was written in 2004, so please excuse a little bit of the aged language in it. So this is a story that Harriet Tubman herself told. It's not in quotations. We don't have her exact story, but she would go later in her life and would talk in Boston or other places in salons. And this was a story that was reported that she had told about one of her own experiences. She was helping two men escape to their freedom, and they were out on their way. And so this is the story as it picks up. They were on a road that they had never been before. And then this is from the book. Blacks abroad without passes feared that mounted patrols would come charging along at any moment and sweep them back into slavery's net. They knew that irate masters pursuing with bloodhounds might suddenly appear. More than the autumn chill in the air caused them to shiver as they moved as quickly and as silently as possible, hoping to reach their next stop before dawn. If cloudy skies obscured the moon, their guide was able to feel the moss on a tree trunk to tell them which direction they should take. Despite dangers and risks, the men were glad for their fortune, following Moses into the promised land. During this moonlit trek, Tubman decided to move off the highway and to cross an open field. After a long spell, the field ran out and Tubman faced an unfamiliar river. She walked along the banks to see if there might be a bridge or even a boat to get them across. After a fruitless search, fearing sunrise might overtake them before they made it to cover safely, Tubman insisted that they cross on foot. The two men absolutely refused. I'm going to read the quote from the book, fearing drowning more than the slaveholder's lash. And then I learned earlier today, they also feared being killed if they were seen in the water as a prosecutable offense. Back to the reading. Rather than draw her pistol or waste her breath, Harriet Tubman waded across alone. After she made it to the other side, the two men meekly followed. Soaked and weary, they found they had to ford yet another wide stream before they came upon an isolated cabin. Tubman determined that a Black family lived within and used her powers of persuasion to obtain food and shelter. The three soaked and weary pilgrims gratefully cried out and slept up all day to rest for the next day ahead. Thank you.
Becca, thank you so much. That was fascinating. And I am really in awe of how the freedom seekers learned their environment and followed the waterways to freedom. So in addition to that being an efficient way to travel quickly and to help slow those who were employed to capture them and return them to slavery, the waterways were also an ideal choice because they could hide in plain sight. So many enslaved people, as well as free men and women, worked along the waterways. They worked on the docks. They worked as fishermen, laying muskrat traps like she did. And so it was normal to see Black people at the water. It made it much less suspicious if you saw a Black person or two in a boat traveling down the river. It was just easy to mistake them for fishermen or for doing some other work. As Becca told us, often as the song said, there was a spiritual, like wade in the water, that Miss Tubman would sing. And that one in particular, she used as a signal to tell them to get into the water because catchers' dogs were near and getting into the water would slow them from being able to catch the scent. The many languages of nature come together to tell an all-encompassing and never-ending story of the natural world. As we've heard, we see moss growing on a tree, but Harriet Tubman knew that moss as a navigation tool during the day when she couldn't see the North Star, because moss typically grows on what side of the tree? Nature's language can be combined with human language, and that fueled the Underground Railroad. Conductors, abolitionists, freedom seekers, and the enslaved created a language they used in daily life to communicate about the journey to freedom. Maybe, as Becca said, red, it was the color of a particular person's clothing that said where and when to meet. These symbols were well known right here in North Carolina, on a waterfront in eastern North Carolina in a town called Washington. A woman at the docks would appear to be selling sunflowers. However, the eye of the sunflower was a signal to freedom seekers to stay hidden or to be careful because too many eyes were watching. Sometimes the direction of the sunflowers told people where the watching eyes were. Maybe someone would walk along the docks in Washington, North Carolina, and innocently, oops, spill some black-eyed peas. That was another code to say, eyes are watching, be careful, or stay hidden. If, when you walked along the dock, you saw some brown-eyed Susans at that dock, those brown-eyed Susans were a signal in Washington, North Carolina, that that ship had a friendly captain who would help you get to freedom. Our final presentation on nature's language will bring wildlife, geography, botany, and astronomy together to show how Harriet Tubman, who is revered as one of the first Black naturalists, used her knowledge of nature's language and how to survive in nature to conduct the Underground Railroad. He will give us insight into why Ms. Tubman's legacy inspires a growing number of Black naturalists today, and how that attention that has been given to them over the last few years is motivating more Black Americans to reconnect to the natural world. James Smith is an executive with over 30 years of experience focused on technology, real estate, and operations, including global operations. But nature and outdoor activity have been lifelong passions for him. In the last 5 years, James has focused on environmental issues centering on diversity and inclusion in public places, as well as environmental challenges, and he has focused on clean air and environmental politics. He serves on several boards, including Ann Springs Close Greenway, Clean Air North Carolina, and Nations Forward Land Trust. He also serves as a Charlotte leader for Outdoor Afro, one of the nation's leading nonprofit organizations that works for inclusion in outdoor recreation, nature, and conservation. His mission is to create positive policy changes in environmental politics and land uses. He holds degrees from engineering and finance. So now, James, all eyes and ears, they're on you.
Try to advance this slide really quick.
Excuse the errors on the keyboard.
I'm here to talk about Minty. Anybody remember who Minty is? She's an idol. She's an icon. She's a history figure. But we've never made her human. We look at that and look at the room we're in, look at the kids. Minty was a little girl at some point that evolved into Harriet Tubman. Minty was a 6-year-old tasked was watching a 2-year-old. And when the 6-year-old did not rise to the occasion, the 6-year-old girl sold from her family. We often forget, as we've used terms enslaved, slaved, indentured servitude, these were people. And we often forget that. Harriet Tubman evolved from Minty. Harriet Tubman became an icon, not because of the things that she did, but how she evolved as a person. Earlier, we had an actor portrayal talking about the scar on her head and why this is so significant. Because as a 7-year-old, Minty was on the street. She was fairly close to a runaway slave, and the slave master picked up a 2 to 3 pound rock to stop the runaway slave and hit her in the head. The injuries were so severe that it fractured her skull. This is not 2022. This is not 1950. We're talking about a fractured skull in a time where surgery was still archaic, new, and really, in some cases, non-existent for brain injuries. So when they did the surgery on her, what people don't realize, because she was cattle, they did not use anesthesia. So imagine a little girl, imagine your daughters, your cousins, your aunts at 7, 8 years old, going through brain surgery without anesthesia. Minty was a little girl. That's the fact we should never, ever forget as we kind of isolate, talk about diversity or who she was, this idol, this icon. She was a little girl. Harriet Tubman came late. Minty was a little girl. Minty learned a lot of the skill sets from her dad. She learned them from the village in which she was in. For all of us old enough to remember, it takes a village to raise a child. And then they were the ultimate village. They were beat down, they were abused, they were oppressed, but they were each other's saviors. They brought skills from the old world into slavery. Those skills are what allowed white America to survive. People have often forgotten that when we were taken, say, wait, my lineage, my ancestry, from Africa, the skill sets that we brought to the table were farming, medicine, agriculture, brought astronomy. We brought libraries, Timbuktu, the oldest library in the world. When you look at the pictures recently of Sierra Leone and North Carolina, they are similar. If you ever looked at a picture of Britain, Ireland, don't have very similar land masses. So when the Africans came over, they came over with purpose. When they were brought over, they didn't come over. When they were brought over, they came over with a purpose because they actually knew how to hunt. They knew how to fish. They knew how to cultivate the soil in America, which is what Europeans did not know how to do. And when we think about the history of slavery and why this is so significant, we'll talk about the lost people of Jamestown. We always talk about this. Where did they go? They died. That's what they were. They died, right? We just can't find out where they died at, but we don't want to talk about that. The reason they died is because they didn't run into the Native Americans, the Native Indians. They weren't that fortunate. The folks that landed on Plymouth Rock ran into the Indians who actually knew how to survive in those harsh winters, who knew how to grow crops. They understood it. The people that came from Europe that were in the South also understood they had no idea what was going on. That was the catalyst for slavery. That's why it became the economic catalyst of America. Because once we grew crop, we knew how to sell it. Europeans in general did not know how to grow those crops. Not in the red soil. How many people here are from North Carolina? Oh, that's a lot. But just as many are not. How many of you came down here and said, what's all the red stuff on the ground? How is grass going to grow? That soil did not exist in Europe. So imagine getting off of a boat and seeing red stuff and trying to figure out, where's the soil? Because you don't even know it's soil. If you were on West African land, the red stuff was normal. That's what allowed them to survive. That's why slavery was so important. So that being said, I want to go back to Minty a little bit. I want to tell you the evolution of how she became Harriet Tubman. She didn't decide one day that she wanted to be free. All people want to be free. But what got her to move over her fear to become free? It's one thing to say, I want to be free. It's another thing to say, I'm willing to die to be free. They are two different things. The catalyst for her is that two of her siblings, her closest siblings, had been sold off. And she could no longer take it. So she decided that she was going to leave. She was going to get her freedom. She talked to, we heard it earlier, she talked to her husband. Husband said, oh, no way. Talked to her brother and said, I'm not doing that. Because the fear of dying is real. Everybody's a hero when there are no consequences. Right? Everybody says, hey, I'm going to jump in front of the bullet until somebody points a gun at her. She got over her fear. She decided, I'm leaving. At that point, Minty ceased to exist. She became Harriet Tubman. She took on her mother's first name, and she took on her husband's last name. That would allow her to travel in a way they would not find Minty, because that's who they were looking for. At that point, Harriet Tubman is going through the rebirth. She's now born. She's now born again. Minty, at that point in time, ceases to exist. Always miss the human piece of Minty. She was a little girl. When we talk about marriage, and I also want to put something in perspective, when we talk about marriage, we talk about mature 20 and 30 years old, getting married, got an established life. When she got married, she was 19. She was a little girl. In our modern time, she's just getting out of high school. Can any of you guys imagine getting married at 19 or having your daughters walk down the aisle at 19? Probably not. Can you imagine your little girl deciding, you know, I don't really like North Carolina, so I'm going to get in 77 and I'm going to walk to Florida. Minty did it with a bag that was about this big. Are any hikers in the group? Couple hikers? We've got our modern low weight bags. We've got our filters for the water. Minty had no water. Harriet had no water. Harriet had to drink dirty water. Harriet had to understand what she could eat on her way to freedom. Harriet had to understand that there were people looking for her. So she had to use the things that you just heard about. She had to use geography. She had to use astrology so that she can move forward. But Harriet also had something that most people don't realize. Harriet, she fainted, had visions. This is what scared people about her. Not only her family, it scared the slave owners. You see, that accident that happened, it wasn't an accident. When they hit her with that rock, from a young age, Harriet started to have visions of the future. One of the most well-known, well-documented people who had actually life visions. A lot of people don't know that. So when people were saying, hey, let's go to the right, Harriet fainted and told everybody, I don't think that's the way to go. And they'd be trying to shake her up. Wake up, Harriet. And she's like, no, I think we got to go to the right. Because her vision had already told her there were slave catchers on the left-hand side. No one actually talks about that. So the reason the term Moses came, not just because she led people to freedom, it's because they believed that Minty, who became Harriet, had a direct connection with God. Because Minty, who became Harriet, could see things that no one else could see. Which is why she was one of the most successful people on the Underground Railroad. This is huge. Because people had to have a trust in her to go forward. And how do you trust somebody who's always having fainting spells? How do you trust somebody that you don't really know is going to lead you to freedom? There's no Twitter, there's no Facebook saying, here comes Minty. So you're relying on blind faith and on a person through the grapevine that's talking to God. Because her visions were leading her to places that other people could not go. She was a human who withstood torture, oppression, rape, horrible things that just none of us could imagine. She then went to Pennsylvania. And what people don't realize is this. Pennsylvania, although it was free, was a stopping ground because the federal government passed something called the Fugitive Slave Act. Has anyone ever heard of it? Raise your hand, I'm just kind of curious. A lot does. So what the Fugitive Slave Act, it said for the first time that if a slave runs away to a free state, they no longer are guaranteed that freedom, and that slave catchers could go into free states and then to get the runaway property and bring them back to the South. First time in history. Because what happened is in America, the South became the dominant party for Congress, who then passed these laws that said, okay, we're not going to allow our property to just walk away. It also institutionalized the jail systems for the first time. So what she had to do is she left Pennsylvania and she went to Ontario, Canada. People often forget this one fact. So although the journey from Maryland to Pennsylvania was about 95 or so miles, that was for the first several trips. By the time she's up in her 10th trip, she's going to Canada. From here, that is the equivalent of walking from Charlotte to Vermont. No food, no MasterCard, no hotel. Blistered feet. No Keen shoes. Whatever the brands are now, people wear, I don't know. Reeboks, Nikes. None of it. So in the evolution of Minty Harriet, she learned a lot of things. She learned to trust herself. A lot of people don't realize that she had a lot of self-confidence. It was her visions that kept her going forward. It was the belief that her father, when you read about her, was always with her. So when she was eating berries, or she was looking at the stars, or she was doing any of that stuff, it was her faith in her own father that pushed her forward. She, the hero, she had a courage that none of us, I would say, would ever have. She was a little girl that turned into a woman, that turned into an icon. And the one thing that we need to talk about as we talk about her 200th anniversary is we need to humanize Minty. Minty died in 1913. Most of you have grandparents or parents, depending on your age, who were born at the same time that Harriet Tubman existed. My grandfather was born in 1906. Minty existed in the lifetime of our grandparents. Slavery was not that long ago. And if you want to put some things in perspective, on a deep thought, when are Black Americans first free in this country? When are Black Americans even defined as Americans in this country? So one thing I'll leave you with is this: the basic tenets of being an American. Right to assembly, the right to vote. Basics, right? Walk around without, being harassed. 1968, we're past the Voting Rights Act, because in many parts of America, Black folks cannot vote unencumbered. So the reality is, the first generation of Black Americans, 1969. Think about what I just said. The first generation of Black Americans is 1969. Because you can't call yourself American if you don't even have the right to vote. That's what I thought the Constitution was for. So when we talk about these documents being for all of us, they weren't. Misty understood. One of her famous sayings is, people would say, "How many people have you freed?" She said, "I freed a lot. But I would have freed more if they didn't know they weren't free." That's something to think about. Misty, the little girl, turned into an icon. Something that we always need to remember. That we need to remember her not as the old lady that we are always projecting her to be. We have to remember that Misty was a little girl. Misty overcame a lot of struggles. Misty became Harriet. Harriet became the icon. And Harriet, a woman with courage. And we always need to remember that when we say the word slave or enslaver, what we need to understand is they're just people. They're humans. And we've dehumanized them even in our own history books. They're not even people, but they're people. Misty was a little girl that became a woman. And we often forget that piece of the pie. So when we think about Misty, when we think about the little bag that she carried. Now, I'm not politically correct, so I don't know. 19 is not a little girl anymore. I don't know. I'm getting old, right? This is the size bag she carried to go from Maryland to Pennsylvania. This is it. Now think about that for a second. She had 5 or 10 people with her in a little bag like this. So she relied on what her dad taught her. She relied on astronomy. She understood the stars. She understood botany. She also understood, and I'll say this before I leave, she also understood animal life. Because here's something that North Carolina, for you who don't know this, we do have wildlife, we have bears. She knew that during certain seasons, the bear would leave his cave during the day, they would forage, and then they'd come back to their caves at night. So during the day, she would hide in bear caves. And she would find the bear caves because she would find the scat, which is the little kids' poo, right? Find that, follow it back to a cave, stay in a bear cave, and at dusk, she knew it was time to leave because the bears were coming back. That's why they couldn't find her during the day. And she was hanging out in bear caves. And at night, she left the bear caves with whoever she would bring and then pushed on during the night. So she also was a wildlife expert. So when we talk about Misty, we talk about all the things she was without the privilege of formal education. We talk about the oral history of Black Americans. We talk about the oral history, really, of the African. Because for so many, that's how we retain our lifestyle and the pieces of culture that we were allowed to have. So Misty became Harriet. And today we celebrate her 200th anniversary. But I also want to leave you with this thought. Harriet was around your grandparents. That should put things in perspective on the fact that all of these atrocities we talk about were not that long ago. Your grandparents, depending on your age, or your great-grandparents, were around when she was. So 200 years makes it sound a lot different from go talk to your great-grandparents or your grandparents. They were around. With that, I'll turn it back over to Sherry. We'll talk about this a little bit more. I think we have another enactment going on.
I think we appreciate that thorough explanation of Harriet Tubman, the skilled naturalist who understood natural science. But what James did not tell you is that he is quite a skilled naturalist himself. He is a nationally known hiker, backpacker, camper, all those things. And this past July, he went to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. As we come to the end of this program, it's my pleasure to bring back our featured performer to remind us again what James said, that beyond the legend, Harriet Tubman was a real woman with a real story. So once again, I give you Candy Davis Shalom.
And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Put your hands together, honey. Come on. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, What a beautiful celebration, right? What a beautiful, beautiful celebration. All of this that we learned about the Underground Railroad and how I was able to travel from place to place using all the things my dad had taught me. And I feel like we become friends. Y'all feel like that? We become friends here. So my friends, I have a challenge for you. When you leave out of those doors, here is your challenge. I want you to tell my story to at least one other person that you meet this week. Don't let this story just die right here with all of us. Keep this story going. Tell everybody all the things you learned about Harriet Tubman, the naturalist. Raise your hand if you learned something new today. Yeah, so share what you learned with somebody during your week coming up. It sounds like we've done a lot of work, but we got a lot of work to do all around us. Am I right? So tell somebody the story of Harriet Tubman, the girl who became the woman, who became the icon. That's all right with me. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom.
Thank you, Tammy, for that final closing performance. And yes, it is. It's the close of our program, celebrating a phenomenal woman with a special place in Black history and women's history, which does give her a very special place in American history. This phenomenal woman died on March 10th, 1913, at the age of 93, as a noted abolitionist, political activist, and suffragist. We now know her after today as an extraordinary naturalist who understood nature's language and used it to become one of the best conductors on the Underground Railroad. When James talked about the speeches that she gave up north, she said herself in an 1896 speech at a women's suffrage convention, "I was the conductor of the Underground Railroad for 8 years, and I can say what most conductors can't say. I never ran my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger." For this great accomplishment, Harriet Tubman was Moses. She called that because she led people to be free. And therefore, it is fitting and proper that we commemorate and celebrate her as a phenomenal American woman during Women's History Month. So I hope you've enjoyed this symposium about Harriet Tubman. I have certainly enjoyed being your host. On behalf of the Raptor Center, I extend a sincere thanks to our partners for joining us in presenting this unique environmental education program. I would be remiss if I did not recognize the Raptor Center staff, led by Executive Director Jim Warren, along with Community Engagement Director Laura Kennedy and her team, including wildlife educator Mckenna Schaefer, and back at the back, Audrey Blackburn, our engagement and volunteer manager. And I must give special thanks to Chris Cole, Senior Director of Advancement, and Advancement Manager Shannon Walker for doing the heavy lifting that made this symposium possible. Also, I want to acknowledge my colleagues on the Raptor Center Board of Directors. If any of you are in here, will you please stand? And I would not be a good board member if I didn't invite you to drive a little bit more up Sample Road to visit the Raptor Center Trail. The birds would really like for you to come visit them, but you may also visit our gift shop down at the Raptor Center or out here in the lobby. And please consider a financial contribution to help us take care of the birds and continue great programs such as this one today. Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon in person and virtually. The program has come to an end, but our presenters will stay around so that you can ask questions. Nature speaks in many ways. And my sincere hope is that everyone will make a commitment to get outdoors and learn nature's language. Thank you and have a great day.